All right, we're live.
Morning, guys.
Good morning.
Oh, good to see you looking nice and fresh. What I was looking at talking today, and exploring, delving today with you guys, is the idea of obtaining some sort of form of inner peace through violence, as a bit of an oxymoron as that sounds. And I'm kind of looking to set the scene like with the following bit, and we can all dive in. So firstly, I'm going to kind of give you my sort of look, my view on my understanding of what inner peace is. Also why I think it's important to achieve it, ultimately for everyone. Then I'm kind of looking to go intentionally, how to intentionally expose yourself, like a how-to, I guess, through stresses to get you closer to achieving some sort of peace. I want to touch on briefly how I think and believe, I'm sure you guys probably agree as well, that meditation doesn't have to be sedentary in nature. And then final thing I want to touch on before we all dive in as well is how this kind of transfers to the non-violent parts of your everyday existence, which is the bulk of your life. And then how this is ultimately empowering, which is why we're here. So a bit about background, my views on the inner peace. I was born into a martial arts family, some of you may know, and began formal training, especially in Korean martial arts, from, according to video footage my parents have of me, because they were like paparazzi, of when I could first walk, even in nappies and stuff like that, copying kung fu movies off the TV. And obviously they then took me to their classes that they hosted every day. It was through my experiences and I think in an immersion that I gained my understanding, a greater understanding, I guess, of what inner peace meant to me. And to be honest, I don't continuously experience inner peace, but I think that's probably, it would typically last for a few weeks at a time, but that's probably a survival reason. Probably wasn't too advantageous to our ancestors, who needed to more or less hunt every day before the hunter-gatherer stage, to be just happy and content, just sitting there. They needed to have that urge, that hunger to go and, to hunt, to procreate, to increase the odds and chances of survival. So I think it's nothing wrong with not being in this sustained period of it. I think interruptions are a part and parcel of being human. However, I know that when I'm in the midst of experiencing it, it tends to be when I tend to experience the following bits. So, for example, I wake up every morning and I just feel just grateful. I wake up just smiling, even if there's no sunshine in the room, because my missus demands we have blackout curtains, which I really don't like. But I still just feel grateful and just happy with the fact I'm alive another day to experience everything that's to be offered. I also often find I'm very present in a day, whether I'm saying in the office, out with friends, sitting down, maybe I've got Netflix on or something. I'm just very, very present. Everything's firing. I'm just fully focused and immersed and able to focus. My focus is heightened. Also tend to find that time moves a lot slower. So you often hear people, who are caught up in the rat race, for example, saying, "Oh, doesn't time just fly? I can't believe it's March already," stuff like that. I tend to find that time moves a lot slower. I don't find myself restrained by time, but I'm also able to, things just seem to feel longer. So I can't really think of a more eloquent way to put it, but it's things that seem to feel like a longer day. I have more time. I never feel rushed. I have time to do everything I want and need. I have time to, I think, feel, and I think that comes also mainly from an enhanced, hyper awareness by my senses, like my five senses, the ones people talk about. So I tend to things more sensitive. I thought I had problems at first. I got tested. I thought I had issues with my nerves. I thought I had some sort of itis, but everything was fine. My vision's a lot better. I don't have to wear my glasses often, as weird as that sounds. My sense of hearing's better, smell, taste, everything's just a bit richer. In these periods of time, I didn't realize at first that was a thing until later years. I was able to understand what was happening, but it happened from early on. So that's kind of what inner peace means to me. Now, what I think is important to achieve it is, it's purely for cliche reasons. I think the better care you take yourself, the better care you can take of those around you. Now, hopefully, you've got people around you that you love, or whether it's friends or family. Even to strangers, it gives you the ability to be a better version of yourself, and that you can pass along non-violent, peaceful means and energy to other people around you. And this will then trickle out by a 6 degrees separation, and this on a macro level could positively benefit the world, and take power away from those who benefit from those who need to live vicariously through those in power, to feel something, to feel like they're sustained, and they feel that hole in themselves, where they feel like they're okay and they're content. And I think one thing I like to talk about in particular, whether it's usually it's around other martial arts, this kind of thing happens, I have a conversation, but also with yourselves, it was the how, the practical, how can you get to that point? And I think everyone has, understandably, very many different ways to do it. But I think we're all kind of saying the same thing in a different way. And that's that these stresses need to be both physical and mental in nature, not just say from sitting down, or not just from say listening. I'm just going to contradict myself in a moment. Not just say just listening to someone telling you how to do it, and then just thinking about it, but by actually doing. And so I think the easiest way to do this is approaching it initially from the physical side, because that's something that we've seen like a better controller from the start. And so to increase physical abilities, so whether it's like saying increasing your fighting ability, staying perfectly still, sun or stargazing, ice bathing, the human mind is then from that physical experience reliant more than ever in order to progress and advance, whether it be to do more repetitions of a certain punch kick, staying in the ice bath for longer. The mind is required more and more, because many of the body's knee-jerk reactions are designed to reduce sustained stress. So if I'm looking away from the sun, for example, would be one, to stop performing a particular exercise or to get out of that cold bath, to expect discomfort. And I think this brings to the forefront, the cliche thing I was talking about earlier, mind over matter. Because once you're able to train your brain to sustain through these, because that's the only way to stay in there, I believe it then helps you get to closer and closer to be able to achieve some sort of inner peace. Because, and I think it goes hand in hand with why I think meditation doesn't have to be sedentary. So my favorite example, and probably one of the most accessible to everyone in the world, is Shaolin Buddhist monks and say the Babas in like India. What the methods and extremes they go to achieve the ultimate goal of hitting Zen inner peace. So the monks, they're well known, for probably improving all fight choreography in future movies from that day on, in their kung fu films. But the monks will train intense levels of martial arts that some may think are not practical and effective from the street, but it's brutal in their body. And some of it, when they delve, for example, repetitive hitting of, say, sand or striking objects, some will say, it's to dull the nerves, i.e. destroy them. So the sense of touch is a lot less, so that when they meditate, there's fewer external interruptions caused by the environment around them. But again, then there's also hand in hand with the fact that to get past that point of pain requires a mix of focus and the ability to disassociate yourself from the pain, which is, I think, the starting point, to disassociate yourself to hit that point of inner peace where you can have like an omnipotent view of things from the outside in. And as in with the yogis, for example, or say the Babas, yogis, how you going to call them. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the ones that paint themselves blue. I don't know if you've ever seen that at all, but and like the extent and the intense yoga they do, and the amount of time they hold these positions is just, it doesn't look comfortable. But by the time they've grown a beard, it's like second nature to them, sit on the mountain top, doing what they're doing, smoking what they're smoking, and it's just getting to that. I think it's them and the monks, though the monks are about, say, maybe not putting certain things into their body, I bet their goal is the same. They're looking to achieve the same thing. I think that's how that expands to everything else. So meditation is perceived differently by everyone. But for me, it means being so immersed in a physical activity. Again, it's anecdotal, I guess, that you describe as moving without conscious thought. But that's been why I love martial arts, being used as a tool for obtaining this mind state. So doing things such as, say, what are known as katas or forms, where these predetermined set movements that are putting together attack and defense, you might see people do in movies like The Karate Kid. These things, and say even like, say, combat sparring, where you're not going to kill each other, but there's going to be some potential pain. After lots of practice and repetition of this, it'll become second nature. And, we all hear the phrase muscle memory, as often used to describe this state. And it's very, very true. And that's when you're able to basically just partake in an activity which could be perceived as extremely violent, possibly, but not have things like fear get in your way, because you're able to fully immerse yourself in the moment, knowing, a certain amount of things are going to happen. I know punches and kicks are coming at me, or elbows and knees, and I've trained long and hard enough to where you notice it will slow you down if you stop and think. So again, it gets you into that state of just being, and not on, like, I guess, an unconscious level. It's probably still a level of consciousness there, but it's at the unconscious level. So what it is the achievement of an inner calm that enables your body to attack and defend at speeds beyond conscious thoughts. That you could, when you're conscious, purely to response to the visual, auditory stimuli that your brain has learned to understand, will result in one of a limited number of possible moves coming at you. Now, I think the most important part of this, and why we often hear people say they should teach martial arts in schools for kids, to stuff like that. This is what I think is the most important part. How it actually affects the rest of your life, because the amount of time you'll be spending in combat is a minuscule amount, or I hope it's a minuscule part of your life, because you probably won't live long if it is a constantly occurring thing. So for those to be practical to the bulk of the of the world population, it's got to how is this applicable to the non-violent parts of your life, So I think it's just the idea of surviving through hardships. You're able to grow. It builds character. Is a phrase that probably best suits this. And the more you're able to subject yourself to sort of these extremes and stresses and survive, so whether it's sparring, whether it's fighting, breaking bricks with your bare hands, your feet, your elbows. See some crazy people headbutting blocks. I wouldn't advise that. And and then at the end of your class, you're all friendly, buddy with these people who was trying to hurt and attack moments earlier. Because that's often a common occurrence at these martial art classes. At the end, everyone shakes hands after, talks about life. It's always a very nice. If any of you have been in that sort of environment before, you probably attest to that. It's a very friendly environment considering what you're learning to do. And it's basically, you learn that if you can survive that and feel good at the end of it, your irrational fears of other things will inevitably reduce in number. And I think the less you fear from a place of peace, the better your quality of life will be. So my personal experience of this was through, I guess, an extreme side of when my personal experience, I say, of how I think, having lived in the martial arts world, I think going through a lot of physical endurance my whole life, paid off the biggest, probably happened other subtle ways elsewhere, was when the passing of my younger brother, when he passed. I believe that had I not had the upbringing in martial arts that I did, my brother initially falling ill before my first lot of exams called GCSEs when you're 16, going to say college level, and then when he eventually died just before I went to university, I think that enabled me to have to kind of, everyone, or a lot of fears that you'd hear your classmates have about, this exam, that exam. It helped me to break through a new plateau. That, I'm not scared of ink on paper. That's not a concern for me. I know I've studied it. I know I've read it. I'll be okay. And I think, but for that sort of grounding, obviously I'll never know, because I won't know what it would have been like had I not had that level of training. But for that, I probably wouldn't have been able to have gone on and academically achieved what I achieved. And just and it's because I had no rational fear of ink and words on a piece of paper. So I think that's my biggest example I can give of how I think this method of obtaining peace and a way of getting it has benefited me. That's the clearest example I'd give to people. But I kind of want to break it out to you guys, see any of your experiences, what you guys have thought and felt, anything that may relate or even contradict what I'm saying. I'd love to hear. But that's kind of my view on how I think probably an easier way for the masses to achieve some sort or get close to experiencing some sort of inner peace.
Yeah, I think for sharing, Lynn. I've got one question, and then I think Rupert and Ollie want to say something. But when you say violence, I think there's a real distinction between maybe controlled violence and uncontrolled violence, right? So we see obviously a lot of people lashing out randomly when they don't have control over their emotions or their states of mind, and obviously that's probably from a lack of training, and they don't have peace in their lives. So what you're talking about is kind of very structured. You trust the people around you in that environment, even though you're fighting them. They're not going to actively try and hurt you, but the violence in that sense is conditioning you, first of all, to be present, like you said, because you've got to react to what's going on faster than you can think. And that's the part I found most sort of attractive when I've taken a few classes. I haven't really gone deep into it at all, but just the few classes I've done, I always felt like it's very visceral, very real. You forget everything else that's going on in your life. It's just what's there in front of you in the room. And obviously if you stay with it, that level of conditioning to a real threat in that sense of defending yourself, it puts everything else into perspective, things like whatever exams or just day-to-day stuff. I think a lot of our fears are very sort of heightened or imagined because we don't have a lot of actual threats in our lives. So it's we don't have sort of a very good baseline, and if you have that baseline of having had to deal with that threat and react to it and prepare yourself, I think you feel obviously a lot more confident in yourself because you can defend yourself, and as a sort of male especially, that's a very sort of primal thing. You'll just feel better about life generally. You won't worry about walking down the street or whatever, just that sort of day-to-day reality. You'll probably feel a lot more confident, but also you just have that resilience against stress because you've kind of, it's just like people in the army and had that extreme level of stress. Everything else is kind of like not even an issue, and a lot of military vets go on to start businesses and do really well in private sector because they've already gone through that extreme level of stress. So I think I'll hand it over to Roop because he's got something to say on that.
Well, I mean, I think it's just pertinent that you've talked about that because that's pretty much me in a nutshell. And I think it is all about you live in three places, don't you? You live in comfort, stretch, and panic, and they effectively deter how much stress you have in your life. And if you spend most of your time in stretch, not in panic, because that's where it's a little bit more extreme, but if you spend most of your time in stretch, all of a sudden your comfort levels are extremely wider. So for me, that's a really good experience of, what you said, Michael, about the military regime where you're actually exposed to quite a lot of stress. Some of it fun, some of it not so much fun. You do learn to live with a much higher level of stress. So that means that when you do come out to interact with the real world, everything seems a little bit more enjoyable and not so stressful. And I'm not sure it's direct violence that I learned in the military. It was more indirect violence about what I was potentially going to be doing day to day.
Sure. So when you say stretch and panic, like obviously probably panic's more like a live war sort of scenario, and you see a lot of vets come home completely destroyed because they just had too much of that PTSD and just going too deep. So there's a lot of trauma there that can go push you over the edge essentially. But I think army training, just the training aspect of it, is probably similar to martial arts in that it's more controlled, more structured, and it's obviously preparing you for something that's going to be even crazier in that sense. But martial arts doesn't always go to that level where it's like you're not killing each other. In martial arts, it's hopefully a referee or someone who's going to stop that. So maybe there's a different level of where that panic can get pretty extreme. But I don't know, Lim, maybe you got some good stories about your experience with that and sort of limits you faced.
And I mean, what you both said is spot on. The word ultimately is controlled violence. That's definitely what it is, because though you're not going to be aware of everything that could happen, because there is like a perimeter, that itself can probably put a little bit more peace, because I guess, like Rupert was saying, I couldn't even imagine what it'd be like. I guess this isn't a comparable, but say fighting a random person on the street compared to fighting someone in a classroom, compared to war and prepping for war and doing battle drills, for example. Two ultimately different things, I'm 100% sure. That's a good point. That's a very good point. That's why I guess it can be so much more achievable, because this reference to stretch is something that's it's such an important thing. And I think because we're a species that until, compare all of history, very, very recently, not had to go through. I mean, people say it's relative, but when you start saying that it's relative, that means times are good, because you're not worried about being hunted down by a prey, because there's a time when we weren't top of the food chain, and there was things that could outdo us and hunt us, and so now we've completely flipped that on our head. I mean, we domesticate animals, for example. Nothing else as far as I'm aware, the food chain can even dream of doing that. They may have parasites, but that's about it. And I think being in such an alpha and apex position has resulted in probably this unused part of our brain, the reptilian side, is we're not able to release. And I think that release through controlled violence can be very, very, I'm sure it has been proven, I'm sure it's very, very useful. But I know Ollie's got his hand up. So if you want to jump in, mate.
Sure. I do think that the whole thing about increasing your resistance to stress is a big point. But I also think maybe the difference between sort of war and martial arts is that, even back in the day, there was always a distinction, they always had war machines and stuff like that thousands of years ago. It was chariots, and I think that there was always kind of a tradition of sort of learning martial arts in a kind of a self-developmental way. It was probably maybe I don't know, maybe it's more of the stretch sort of side of things. And so in my mind, a lot of it is about being able to expose yourself to a lot of stress, but at the same time being able to be like very relaxed, obviously. But within martial arts, you see people who are so skillful and so relaxed, and it's almost like an abnormal level of relaxation. So I think it does go sometimes more, a little bit beyond, maybe that's the distinction, than being able to just keep your stuff together under a lot of stress, but actually like a yogi, being able to be super relaxed and going into like some weird, deep relaxation state, and then being able to apply that. And then, that then sort of has all sorts of interesting implications that turn back upon your own self-development.
Are the extreme martial artists outside of the ring or the floor or the square or wherever they fight? How those guys that you've just described as being incredibly calm in a stressful environment, how relaxed and stressed are they outside?
I think it's important to make a distinction between there's a whole debate there about sort of professional sort of combat sport fighters, and then sort of like other styles of martial arts as well. But I would say that both, if you see people who are really, really on top of their stuff in any aspect, whether it's combat sports or Tai Chi or Kung Fu or what have you, I think people have this sort of deep sort of confidence and resilience you get a lot of the time. But definitely specifically if you're talking about people who do Tai Chi and Kung Fu and Shaolin monks, they're kind of just like, we would think that they would be tripping out if we could like read their brain chemistry, brain scans sometimes, because they're just completely empty. The idea is they're completely empty in their minds. It's like they're meditating as much as they're training, and there's no input, there's no variance on the brain waves or whatever when something's coming in. And the idea is to be able to do that when you're moving. But I don't know, it's a guess. But yeah, I think you can have that, but it doesn't necessarily apply to all combat sports necessarily, in my opinion.
I think there's also a dimension of sort of this being a domain-specific ability type thing, where if you entrain yourself only in a specific environment where certain conditions are always met, like for example, you're always fighting on the mat, or you're always fighting indoors, or like you're always fighting in the context of friendly interaction, and you're never going to competition, then there's going to be certain things that you're not subjected to, and so you're not going to be including them in your optimization process. And so one thing that I found very interesting to sort of ponder was something I think that Joe Rogan once pointed out, which was this idea of that all the martial arts separately thought they were the best, of course, because you have to think that in order to pursue it. And of course, you also have your cultural background. Only certain options are actually available to you. But then once they had to compete globally against other martial arts in the Ultimate Fighting Championships and similar sort of all martial art competitions, it became apparent very quickly what martial art actually is sort of the most generally applicable and superior. And so that's why today have virtually have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a requirement nearly to be successful in Ultimate Fighting Championships, because it seems to be the most generally applicable form of martial arts. So it's really always a question, are you subjecting yourself to stress, as we've already talked about, but stress across what range of factors, so to speak?
Yeah, so I guess there's different objectives here, right? One is, oh, sorry, you cut out there, Moritz. There's two different objectives. Like one is competing to see, like I said, who's the most effective, and that's like a professional domain. But then the carrier effects that Lynn's kind of saying outside of that domain into your life, it obviously doesn't matter if you're the most brutal or the killer in that sense. Everyone's going to benefit from that crossover outside of their lives to that sort of piece. That Ollie was saying, their brain waves are just different from everyone, and they don't react to stress in that same way. So I don't think we're going to face a lot of dangers like we used to, when there was other predators. But I think that there are a lot of stresses, and obviously humans are trying to dominate other humans all the time. So in a more subtle way, you can get stressed when you pick up on that in the workplace. You can sense when your boss is being an asshole, or your colleagues are playing politics. Like I've gone through that in my career. And so knowing how to handle that, and obviously being confident in yourself, I think probably this sort of aspect of martial arts training or physical training can definitely prepare you for how you handle yourself in the workplace and at home and all kinds of situations as well. Go on, Roop.
Lynn, how do you, or open to the floor, how does anyone actually measure inner peace?
Nice. I think for again, that's what I'd make sure to say was like, in my opinion, because I'm very, very aware. But all I know is that everyone has their tolerances, I think, whether it's from nature or nurture, on what they can and can't endure, what they like and don't like. So when I'm realizing that I liked how I felt, again, I only picked up on it after like probably close to 2 decades of martial arts. But when I'm hitting my mid to late 20s, when things started to become clearer, I was realizing that there were certain ways I liked to felt. That's probably because I was out of also like the formal structured life. Up to age 18, even at university, you like do this, do that. You're at the disposal of your parents to some extent. Depends what your parents are like. And so my life was always very, very structured, to the point where I probably didn't have time to sit and reflect to that level. But I think once I've hit adulthood, had my own space and time created, I could actually think, okay. And when I was experiencing certain points, like, well, why aren't I feeling like this now? How I was feeling a couple of weeks back. So it was from I guess trial and error where I kind of found my happy place and my place of peace. So for me, that's how I think is probably the best one size fits all for all human beings, to say, know what you like and what you truly like, which you can only find out from trial and error. To then be able to find out what is peace to you. So for some people, peace could be sustained stress. Strangely enough, it could be, or what I perceive as stress. For example, that they may, you're someone who's serial entrepreneurs, that may be a zen thing for them, or whereas for some it would be like a serial dopamine hit, starting new businesses, but then it's not necessarily peace. So I think that's my opinion to answer your question. I don't know what you guys think, how you'd measure that.
There is a way to measure it sort of indirectly, because there's also all kinds of bio feedback tools now. But there's a good one called heart rate variability, and they've actually shown that it's a predictor of good health and things like that. So basically, if you have poor HRV, then you're more likely to die from all causes of mortality. But basically, what it's measuring is the sort of frequency of your heart rate, like the beat to beat. And it's actually the opposite of what you'd think. If it's super regular, then you have a low HRV. If it's sort of more erratic, the beat to beat differences are not so regular. That's considered a good HRV. So, but basically, every time you're exposed to stress, it's how long it takes to return to that sort of baseline. And you can measure HRV just by holding clips in your hand now and putting a chest meter around your heart to kind of measure that. But there's all kind of apps that can show you that. So I would say inner peace is when you can demonstrate sort of real physical, your physical chemistry is at peace, and you'll see when people are stressed all the time, their HRV will be all over the place, like they can't even control their, blood pressure and sort of basic things. So that there's sort of, more obvious ones of stress like that. That's sort of chronic stress when you have poor health and things. You can measure your body's feeling stressed, and I think that carries over to the mind. Like if your body's not healthy, your mind won't be healthy. It's definitely related. And so part of that training you're doing in martial arts is physical conditioning, so your body's actually healthier, but also your mind then can perceive stress very differently because it's been exposed to just more extreme forms than most people would. And I think that it kind of is interesting, the experience of Lynn, where like being raised from a very young age in a sort of tradition like that, and sort of being initiated from very young. I think that, young males would have had that initiation in almost all tribes to go out and experience that form of stress, hunt with the men, even being sent out on their own to kind of face some kind of, enemy or danger. So that's something that's like completely missing from guys today. We just kind of go out into the world after, like you said, Lynn, being mollycoddled by our parents and kind of, and the state and education, everything else, have been kind of told what to do. And then there's never that point where you really have to go out and face anything, except maybe like your first job interview. And that's like, for most people, the biggest danger they faced in their lives, right? So it's kind of, what people freak out about today is funny. But the inner peace, I think, comes when you really faced a few enemies and faced some dangers. And obviously seeing that, you're able to overcome that. But HRV is quite good. There's other biofeedback tools. I don't know if anyone else has any comment on that.
So are you saying maybe it's like you could say it's a feeling of stability, maybe?
Yeah. That would be a nice, succinct way to put it. Definitely.
Do you know when you're not feeling that inner peace, Lynn?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I'll feel it. I think it's
How's it feel?
it's not fun. I function well enough. Again, because I've maybe got general higher tolerance. Not to pat myself on the back, but I'm very aware of when I'm not in that zone. Things will just wind me up more. Things will bother me more. Basically, there's a nice word from economics: externalities. Externalities will have a greater effect, whether it's positive or negative on me. Obviously, I don't mind the positive ones, but it's that when it's the negative ones hit, because the negative emotion can be so much more powerful. I think that was mentioned in one of our conversations last week. They have such a larger effect on you and your being that it's kind of something we really want to try and limit as much as possible. I will experience the same thing, but how it affects me. So whether, say, a client is just having a moan, and I can just sit there and it doesn't bother me, and I'm digging in thinking, okay, something's not right in their day, they're not happy about something, not just about what's happened, because they're probably blown out of proportion, but something else in their life isn't working. So I'm far more empathetic. Actually, that's good. I'm far more empathetic when I'm in the good zone. That's a good way to put it. Whereas when I'm not, I just want to put the phone down. I have my, it's kind of becomes a lot more. I think actually that's empathy. I have far more empathy when I'm in the good zone, when I'm in the good place, experiencing more peace. That's a nice way to sum it up all together. What about yourself, Rupert? Have you got, obviously you're going through military, so on. I mean, you've not probably told us all about the military, because probably some, bits you can't say. But is there any, what's your, what have you found after obviously going through what you've been through?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, I was not a frontline military. I wasn't on the front line at any one point, because when I was in the military, I was doing some aircrew training, and that takes the best part of 7 years. Wow. And I did 4, and then they changed the goalposts a bit. But I think the stress that I was trying to think about whether it was physical or mental stress that I went through, because when you're in an aircraft pulling G, it's pretty physical. At the same time, you're supposed to be mentally performing, so it's pretty stressful. But again, I think it just comes down to what's, where you sit in terms of comfort, stretch, and panic. Because, society tells us that our mothers should just keep us in comfort, and if you don't get put in stretch, you'll never grow if you're not in stretch. So for me, I love being put in stretch. In fact, I really hate comfort now, and I cannot sit with any kind of I don't want to say boring normality, but I then struggle to relate to people that like to sit in comfort. I want to be, you could liken it to learning. I always want to be learning. I always want to be growing, and therefore, comfort to me is just, it's not very interesting. But funnily enough, even though I was in the military, I never really I've never experienced any kind of violence in my life at all. So I haven't really associated it to inner peace. So I'm really interested to learn about this, because I can definitely imagine it. Although my job would have been to potentially drop some bombs on people, or, take some other people's lives, which would have been very stressful. And the military certainly didn't make you aware of the mental stresses of it. I'm now seriously considering the idea of, boxing. I've had one fight in my life in the school playground.
Did you find peace after that fight?
Say that again.
Did you find peace after that fight? Yeah.
Good question. I don't know. It was over so quickly, because the guy was, 5'4" or something, and I'm 6'2". So I'm not really sure you can even define it as a fight. But actually, just going back to what Michael said, that was uncontrolled violence from him, not from me. Mine was purely uncontrolled. It was probably a reaction. But yeah, I actually think the military guys would probably benefit a lot from learning about this early on. I think there's a lot to be said for having controlled violence and understanding what it is.
I think the military is probably just more technical, right? Like, they train you on what you need to know and the physical aspects of that and conditioning, but the mental aspect, they don't. maybe they don't care as much because they want you to just kind of follow orders. And I think when you have real mental peace and inner peace, you probably don't want to go and kill people. So there's something to be said for keeping people kind of unprepared in that aspect. So they just kind of follow instructions.
In hindsight, I'm so grateful that I never went and did that job, because most people that go and do it, they're totally unaware. And that leads to, serious lack of inner peace. The PTSD is the extremity of it. So I don't know, is dropping a bomb controlled violence, and has it given them inner peace? Absolutely not.
In that case, it's sort of virtualized. Like it's not really you having the possibility of negative feedback coming back to you in a very short cycle. Like you're not actually yourself subject to stress that could hit you, rather only the psychological stress. But I wanted to point out something in the military training question we just talked about, which is there's differences in how the military trains different troops, and also what they're trying to achieve with different training systems. Like boot camp, for example, is supposed to subject you to so much stress that naturally those people who are able to take it and slug on anyways are selected for, such that then those can be sort of even further honed. Like the Marines, for example, when they go through the selection process, like only like a minuscule percentage of people who go to that experience make it. And that says something. It sends a signal to the people who are looking for something that these people have something naturally and are not sort of correcting for it with specific training. And so then they can take them and add them to like more specific training. And actually you see a lot of sort of drive in the military, especially in the US military, to school their soldiers, especially the elite ones, Marines, for example, to have all this mental stability and this sort of extreme ability to be subjected to stress and deal with it. And they're also, I think, the least likely to fall prey to PTSD, for example, because they are trained in that as well. So there is also a component of, like, they're actually looking into things like group flow. There's, I know whether you've heard of Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler and their work that took the Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow further. And flow is the sort of experience of perfect equilibrium between like challenge and skills being matched. And so there's actually an experience that's sort of group flow, and the military is one of those areas where they're really putting lots of resources into exploring that and documenting that and manufacturing it in the military so as to increase the combat readiness and effectiveness of these troops. So there is definitely some parts of the military where they are explicitly trying to engineer this.
Yeah, go on, Ollie.
Yeah, I was thinking that that makes a lot of sense, right? Because people do kind of, I think, well, what it makes me think of is the camaraderie that you get in martial arts and in combat is in my experience very unlike anything that I've encountered before. And I feel that when you fight with someone or when you spar with them, even if it's a real fight, then you still have some sort of weird camaraderie. And I suppose, I've never done sort of martial, like, have those team MMA things now in Russia. You have like teams of like 10 people and then they kind of beat each other up with MMA gloves on. I've never experienced that before, but I can only imagine that that's what it's like. When you fight someone, you kind of really know who they are. Because for me, I think it's a very honest, it's almost like the most, yeah, right, there's MMA in parkour, says Moritz. Yeah, it's the most honest and the most sort of direct, for me, form of sort of self-expression. What's more primal and simple than conflict? It's not speaking or dancing, or drawing. It's combat and conflict. And you can I do like the idea that you could kind of really learn to really communicate and really get to know someone if you were sort of fighting alongside them. And then, I've never been in the military, but I know people come back with sort of really crazy bonds as well. So
it's the ultimate bond. When you've been through something that stressful, whether it's the military or anything else, it's got to be the ultimate bond, isn't it?
Yeah. No, yeah, I think people, and I think that definitely the whole thing of knowing someone better when it's in combat. Like I can sort of fight with someone or train with someone, even if it's just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something. You know, if I've trained with them a couple of times and sort of gone hard and had a hard spar, in some way I will know that person better, and they'll know me better than some people I've known for years and spent a lot of time with, because you can't, you know exactly how much someone's sort of operating from their ego, and exactly how much someone's sort of really sort of how honest they are in certain ways, and it's very difficult to articulate actually. But I think it's
I think I might have,
sorry.
I think I may have a theory. It's pure speculation, Ollie, but what you've said is triggered me to think of something. It could be, again, I'm assuming, so I'm not an anthropologist in any way, shape, or form, but if when I'm assuming our ancestors, you know, or even the hunters nowadays, you have to respect your prey. Could come and like if you're hunting a lion, for example, or you know you're tribe on tribe hunting, you have to respect the fact that they could come and get you. And I think I often hear the word respect used. That, you know, you got to be aware. And I think that's probably where it comes with, say, direct combat. Say when martial arts, for example, that's purely what you're doing. You're purely going in, and that's why you learn to block as well as punch, right? Because you got to respect the fact that something could be coming your way. So that could be, again, I'm just throwing this. That's as far as I've got with my thinking, to be honest, on this one, guys. But just thinking what Ollie said, that I don't know if that's
I'll pick up on there, because I think when you're really able to like spar with someone or fight with someone, there's a lot of mirror neurons and empathy going on. So what you were saying earlier about when you're feeling inner peace, it's like empathy is heightened, and that's actually the same when you're fighting, because the best fighters have the best empathy. They can kind of predict exactly where their opponent's going to strike because their mirror neurons are firing, right? So that's just a part of nature. When you kind of get into resonance with something, it could be your prey, it could be your opponent, but the more effective you can detect, sort of empathize with them, the better you can hunt, the better you can fight. And so that probably carries over outside, you know, of fighting into those other aspects. We just have better empathy, better connection with other people around you.
Nice, cheers. That works. That helps. That's crazy.
Makes sense.
But
I think
go ahead, Moritz.
Okay, I think just something that I put in the chat, but I want to sort of just briefly mention, is the idea that in fighting, in conflict, when you're actually in an adversarial setting, your actual preferences and your actual skills are revealed, rather than sort of what you say you know, or what you say you can do, and what you say you prefer. So that's why people, I think, respect other people in a setting where people demonstrate courage rather than saying I'm the best. And so it's also very interesting always to watch how the conversations before fights between two fighters play out, like where they sort of do this guerrilla beating the chest, and then in the end, the actual fight only determines who actually could back up their words.
Yeah, I agree with that very strongly. I think it's the ultimate. The more you kind of go down that path, the less, for me, I have the less. Like when I see someone walking down the road and they have a little swagger, and you know, like I grew up in Manchester, it's like reasonably rough city, and you know, you'll see people sort of have these exchanges all the time, and kind of like do all sorts of body language stuff, and then when you're just training to fight without any kind of, it's not, you know, it's real fighting, not too sporty, not too many rules or whatever, then you kind of are able to cut through the body language and the intention. And you know, you can tell how tough someone is a lot of the time. And that's one of the biggest benefits, I think, has been for me.
100%. On an anecdotal level, you've actually made me think of a couple, not like exciting stories, but it's made me think of stories from my childhood where one when I was about 10 years old, and the school bully decided to have a go at me. And I was you know, middle child syndrome, very shy, you know, all those things. And I remember being in the playground, and this kid, he seemed massive at the time. He obviously was a kid, right? Never forget his name, Bobby. Never forget his name. And you know, and a circle formed around us, you know, and I'm shitting myself basically. And before I knew it, he was on the floor, and I to this day I don't remember what happened. But my friends described to me what I did in a way, and I did some extremely elaborate kick It's like a back spinning kick to this kid. And he was on his bum in the puddle. Lucky there was a puddle there, added to his embarrassment. And that was my first, the time what Ollie was saying, that kind of helps. And then to the point when I got to senior school, you know, when you become the smallest kid, all these basic guys that are like reaching adulthood and testosterone levels are peaking. And I'd see a fight in the hallway. These two massive guys, like, you can say they could probably punch holes through, at the time anyway, obviously they were kids as well. And then you see it, and then they go and like, you see a fight happen, and I'm standing there thinking, what is this? Like, what is this? No one's hitting anyone. There's no accuracy. There's no precision. It's taking too long. Why are they both still? And that's when I was kind of thinking, like Ollie was saying, oh,
it's not chest beating.
Yeah, exactly. Like Morris said, chest beating, big, angry, can't do anything with it. And that kind of, for me at that age, made me a lot less fearful of school fights. I still you get the natural adrenaline rush because that's, fight or flight kicks in, has to. But it has helped put things into perspective. Like, oh, so like you guys are saying, you see these people walking around with swagger, and then like Mike was saying, when you in general walking down the street, you're a lot less fearful. Because like, not that you're going to win, only takes one lucky punch to end knock you out. But you're very aware that you can maybe block their attack and then run still, And so that again, that's now we're talking about it, saying that's probably another reason why I'm able to personally, and probably I'm sure many others are able to find some sort of peace. May not be like extreme in the peace. I'm sure there's still further I can go or they can go. But yeah, just thinking back to those two stories actually kind of reminds me of that. Yeah.
I think what you mentioned about testosterone peaking is actually a really important part of this discussion that we haven't really touched on, but like the hormones behind this and how that influences emotions and behavior. Like when like I said, when young men used to grow up, they used to have that initiation, that sort of challenge to kind of channel their testosterone and their emotions and behavior and kind of train it. And now it's just very untrained. So you have all kinds of reactions. And I think maybe the biggest difference is today, like Ritz is saying, that feedback loop isn't there. So, the difference between people potentially sparring or physical, behavior versus like the video game, mentality where you're under sort of mental stress, but it desensitizes you to violence in a different way. You don't have the same respect for your opponent because that feedback isn't there. You're just kind of using your mind, and that has some very strange effects. Obviously, kids growing up very unbalanced. And it's different, different, I guess, views on that, whether video games are good or bad. I mean, I played a lot of video games and it didn't seem to affect me too much, but I think that other parts of my life were more balanced. And, some kids are just playing, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, and then they're indoors the rest of the day in school. So it's just the whole balance is off in terms of how that testosterone, how those hormones are kind of driving their behavior. It's being channeled into video games and violence in that sense without the feedback. And that produces sort of very unbalanced individuals. So I think that's a real challenge for sort of the generation after us, if you like, that are maybe more exposed to video games and even less to physical stress.
Do you think those guys have more or less inner peace?
Well, I think it's just not channeled in a sort of coordinated fashion. So the feedback isn't there. So you can get a lot more stress in that sense. If you look at like cortisol, another hormone that kind of measures stress, people that play a lot of video games and people that are in that sort of desensitized violence a lot in their minds, I don't think they have much inner peace because the feedback isn't there. And there's probably something to be said for the physical aspect that's missing, and that conditioning your body physically will actually increase health. So certain, hormones will get released, like testosterone, that just build up and has nowhere to go, but it's actually getting channeled into physical exertion, and that's what's probably missing today, because kids are just static and still all the time. And then when they, maybe do speak out or they're erratic, then, they're not paying attention in school, then they'll just give them Ritalin or antidepressants or something to shut them up. So it's like one hormone is out of control, so we'll give them another, a hormone to shut them up, and it's not giving them any room to really channel that, to develop that and understand themselves better. So I think it's super tough for kids nowadays.
And also, I think on that, from video games, you can learn very, very quickly that if your avatar dies in the game, you won't die. Whereas I think if it's something that actually involves your physical being, you learn very quick that yes, it's a controlled environment. But if I don't have I always refer martial arts to my easiest point of call. If your hands aren't blocking or you're not dodging that kick or punch, there's a good chance you can suffer some real pain. And not death is your first thought, but I think knowing that they can detach themselves because it's just an animation, you just restart it. Okay, I'll do it again this time. Yeah, they'll experience stress because that's what they know. But I'm assuming that the primal side of the brain is tamed, and I mean that there isn't a spike, I guess, in stress enough for them to learn to deal with it.
It's just a different form of stress. So like there isn't the feedback, but they're experiencing stress very real. Like you can imagine something almost as effectively as the actual doing of that, right? Like they've shown that athletes can imagine working out and imagine running, and their physiology will actually respond as if they were running and lifting weights. So the imagination is super strong, like how it ties into the hormones and actual physical changes in the body. So I think they're under constant stress, but just mentally without actually moving. And so the stress has nowhere to go. Like literally, if you're filled with cortisol and you're not actually moving your body, it's just flooding your body, and then your hormones are completely just destroying your health. So I think that's probably the problem, is to have no release for that sort of emotion and hormones.
Makes sense.
Michael, would you say that that's to do with sort of nervous system stress? Like people sitting in front of a computer, their brain doesn't necessarily know that it's not real, getting all these hormones. And then if they don't have that kind of robustness from actually doing training and actually experiencing it, they won't have the nervous system growth, because your nervous system develops and gets stronger, doesn't it, over time, if it's kind of combined with exercise and with adrenaline and things like that. And then when they finally experience it, it's just going to be an overload, and they're not going to get it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, so nervous system's probably pretty broad, hard to define that. But I think, when you talk about fight or flight, and that's definitely linked to the hormonal response. Like we don't have that feedback. That's just totally missing. So you get stuck in fight or flight, and you can't get out of it because you're just going from one stress to another. So I think video games is just one form of that, right? Like people experience that in the workplace. Or with exams or whatever it is, just like chronic stress, and then technology is constantly stimulating you. So again, it's like another form of stress your body has to manage. So I think there's just so many different forms of, if you like, stressors that affect the nervous system, that people don't have the resilience because they haven't had any training. So I think actually that's probably one of the benefits of martial arts, is you're better able to cope in the modern world, but there's all kinds of other stresses, but you can just put it in perspective in terms of how you're perceiving it. And because so much of it's perceptual, like I said, it's how you perceive it in your mind is actually how your body's reacting, whether it's happening or not around you. Whether it's a video game or you're actually sparring with someone, you're imagining it, and so it's real for you. And so the effect on your nervous system, if you're not able to put that in perspective, is just going to overwhelm you. And so I think people actually get to the point where they can't even produce cortisol because they're so stressed out, their bodies just burn through it, and you have no way to then even make cortisol. So then you have even less resilience than you would otherwise. But go on, Moritz.
Yeah, I think there's a component to this, that if you don't have an outlet to let those energies that are building up from this experienced stress, if you don't have an outlet for putting that out, then you will have this build-up experience, that both sort of degrades your overall ability to properly respond to perceived stress, as well as your ability to actually deal with your energy household in a sense, like not in an esoteric way, but like in a very real sort of bodily way, I would say. And one quote that I recently took from a video series that I'm watching called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. I mentioned this before. One of the quotes that I took from that was, "Anger is just a powerful way your bioeconomy creates a salience landscape so that action and identities are obvious to you." And so that's sort of a sentence that bears some unpacking, but the basic idea is that anger is sort of this phenomenon, this felt sense that is not really something in your control. It's a bodily experience that's rising up from perceived stress or perceived danger, and that increases your perceptual focus on what is threatening the environment and makes it obvious to you what kind of paths of action you can take. And if you then don't take sort of high risk or high skin in the game paths, I would say, of action, then you're sort of blunting your ability to use your anger in productive ways. And this is something that I feel a lot of people who are stuck in school for like 10 hours a day and like for 12 years in their earliest parts of their life, like me, like I was, have a lot of hard time dealing with, because they've been conditioned for so much time to internalize all the sort of felt sense of what's rising up, and to deal with it, to deal with that through the response of just sitting still. And then we wonder why people have sort of unbalanced mental lives, because they are not allowed to and not encouraged to take that energy and actually play it out in the outside and play. There's actually a lot of good studies that show that people, or especially young kids, should spend at least 3 to 4 hours outdoors playing, and would probably perform much better and learn much faster and better in school, even in the sort of shortened amount of time they would have left to to deal with the subjects they're already learning. So we're constantly neglecting the body because we've put so much emphasis on literacy, like words, symbols, language, how these things fit together, and then specific rote knowledge, but not really on the process by which you make that relevant and meaningful to you, and how you then build your own process of engaging with the world, and finding that inner peace that includes actual action that has direct impact that you can observe.
Yeah, I think the part about being overdeveloped in one area and completely underdeveloped in the other is another part of sort of the frustration. And you can apply that to like sexual frustration that guys have growing up more and more without that playing and social interaction earlier. I mean, in Singapore, you even have boys' school and girls' schools. I mean, it's the ultimate, form of like separation, where you don't learn about the opposite sex until you're so old and awkward that, it's just so much harder to figure things out. So I think that probably how that testosterone gets channeled, if you're sexually frustrated and you're not able to, socially interact with women and be confident in yourself, then that carries over to your confidence, with women, and just generally, like, you have no out valve or out release for that, then it all kind of gets channeled inwards and you internalize everything, and it just drives you crazy. So I think that's probably where a lot of people just retreat to the safety of a video game or the safety of a pint at the pub, instead of trying to like look and see, okay, what am I feeling? What is going on here? And finding some ways to release that. So these are sort of probably common challenges, we've all kind of faced, and trying to figure out, the initiation's missing that we used to have in these tribe situations. So what has replaced it, and where that gap is, how do you find that, how do you fulfill your needs? So like, unless you are born into martial arts, you probably don't find it until much later. And then it's like, you realize, oh, this is actually helping me to get, better perspective on stress. I feel more resilient. I feel more confident. And so, it's like a nice feedback loop. I'm going to keep doing this because I know it carries over to everything else. And you probably won't be as afraid to have a conversation with a woman at a bar, or, whatever it is that your imagined fear is. I think that the fears of rejection, that all these other weird fears are very heightened when you haven't ever been through other forms of stress.
Irrational.
Because everything is overwhelming you. Yeah, exactly. It's not rational in any real way, but I think maybe the media heightens this, and your peers, there's some sort of ridicule around that maybe gets heightened, but we internalize a lot of things very early and then don't question them. And I think that without that release later on in life, you kind of get stuck there as sort of a very undeveloped form of yourself. So martial arts is sort of one way of bringing that out. So you have some sort of release, and maybe not all the hormones aren't just circulating inside your body and driving you crazy. And you actually feel more confident to go out in the world and kind of maybe go after what you want, whether that be a woman or a business or a career or whatever it is that, you feel driven to. You feel you can actually, it's under your control in that sense. You feel it's within your ability.
Makes sense.
I think I have something to say about that, which is, so right now I'm in Taiwan, right? And I'm basically training Kung Fu full time. And the original martial art I came here for was martial art called Bagua, which is sort of based on geometric movements and stuff like this. So like, it's very interesting for fighting, but the way that it was introduced to me the first time was like this. They said, Bagua is, 8,000 years old. I mean, whatever, all these martial arts have sort of oral histories. They say it's a very old martial art, and originally it wasn't used for fighting. It was used by these Taoist monks in the mountains, and they used it as a form of walking meditation. And the idea was to strengthen your nervous system. And in that paradigm, the idea of a nervous system is the idea of kind of just how many volts can you handle, you know, how many emotions, how much sort of hormonal kind of variance can you take in a short period of time. And the idea is it would sort of strengthen that, and it would allow, it's called Bagua, B-A-G-U-A, and it would strengthen that ability to handle different types of stress. And they didn't use it for fighting. And then over time, they realized that it improved your ability to fight so much that they developed it for fighting. And people talk about Tai Chi in the same way. It develops specific physical and mental or what have you attributes that you can then apply to fighting. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. So I came out here and started doing it. I have to say, when you're doing it and doing these movements, after a while, a teacher will come over and he'll say, all right, take a break. He'll only do that when after a while you get this sort of feeling of emotional tumult, this feeling of sort of being a little bit overwhelmed, or sort of things come up in your mind or whatever. And it's just kind of a specific sort of set of movements. And I think that kind of it's very traditional style of martial arts, that approach. It's the Eastern approach. And I think there's a lot to be said there about having balance and input and output, internal resilience, being able to actually handle stress, and bring you to a place where you can handle. It's that what Rupert was saying, comfort, stretch, and panic. Being able to stretch further and further, increase your capacity without reaching that panic zone. And indeed, Taoists always talk about this 70% zone. You never go beyond 70% because then your nervous system tenses and overloads and begins to shut down. So if you never go past that 70%, your 70% will be way bigger than your 100 originally. I just thought I'd share that.
Well, it's the same analogy with a golf swing, you know. Rory McIlroy doesn't hit it with 100% power because he's way out of control. He'll be in panic, you know. He'll be 50 yards, 100 yards off the fairway. Same deal. Dustin Johnson, you know, the longest drive hitter on the PGA Tour on average, hits something like 310 yards. He carries the ball 310 yards, and he only swings at 85% ever. He's never swung at 100%.
Wow.
Same deal.
Wow.
I'm curious about Bagua though, Ollie, what you're saying about the teacher will come over and stop you. Is that when he senses you're reaching past your 70%? And then I guess these physical movements, they're also kind of releasing emotion that's maybe stuck in the body. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, how that affects it.
I mean, yeah, I think you're it's kind of the right direction there. I mean, it's kind of hard to say because, you know, people talk about these internal arts and stuff with a lot of mysticism, and you really have to be very pragmatic in the way that you cut through them and just try to focus on personal experience without putting some kind of sort of label on those things. But you do get to this point where you feel emotional and things come up. And the teacher even said to me, he said, listen, don't put labels on it. Don't try and call it this or call it that or call it chi or anything. Just when you start to feel the energy is rising up, when you feel an emotional area around your chest, stop, take a break and let it come down. And it is this weird feeling of sort of stretching that capacity within myself. And it's these sort of weird twisting movements. And yeah, he does seem to have a sense of when you're reaching this kind of like stressed mode.
How does it feel when you come back into it at that point, once you've let yourself come down a bit?
It feels, maybe it feels like inner peace. I mean, it does feel very, it's a sense of potency, I suppose, you know, because it's a sort of relaxed sort of feeling of strength, and it's very sort of smooth and stuff. So, I mean, I do those. It gives me another thought there, which is we're talking about what inner peace is, right? And whether it's how in Moritz we're talking about anger being kind of a saliency to give you a landscape of something to look against. Well, you know, if you're talking about sort of Buddhist meditation or any kind of meditation, you look into it, eventually it's kind of like, am I supposed to be some sort of robot or automaton, you know? And then eventually it's that there's the distinction there between sort of emotion, as many people sort of talk about in popular culture, and actually something that's past that. It's not an absence. It's kind of seeing emotion itself as something that might even be sort of a pathology, or a mild pathology. And when you're able to move away that kind of muddied water, then you're actually sitting, it's the idea of getting closer to your true nature. And then you're able to have a relationship with yourself in some way. It's written an emergence phenomenon of your perceptual machinery. Yeah, it's quite good. Yeah.
Well, I would sort of add here, emotions to me are sort of, if you want to caricaturize it perhaps or reduce it a bit, not to be too reductionistic, but we all have a sort of sense and drive to invest in opportunities that are presented to us, and then also to defend those opportunities and defend the sort of territory in however many forms it exists against threats. So like our capital, like could be our family, could be our skills, could be our industry, could be our friends, like whatever we sort of feel an ownership of in some sense, and a willingness to defend, we'll get emotional about in some sense when a threat presents itself or when an opportunity presents itself. So to me, emotions are sort of an emergent phenomenon that signals something to ourselves, brings into conscious awareness an underlying perception of a possibility for gain or a possibility for loss. And so when you like feel happy, it's like, oh wow, I could gain so much from this, or like it could increase the value of something that I already have. And when you feel down, like you have this, something bad could come, and so I should either immobilize or like panic and flee in a sense. So it's sort of, yeah, in a sense, property and our unconscious bodily responses to defending it and enlarging it.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
The attachment that you have then to your identity and all these things you've created around you, what your values are, who you care about, and like you said, any threat to that or any potential gain to that could potentially take you off your sort of inner peace.
Yes.
I think, yeah.
But also that actually, if you don't identify with all those things, even though you may appreciate them but not identify with them, and then actually position to yourself your capacity to build those things as higher than the particular formations that have emerged from your capacity so far, then you will not necessarily feel as strongly emotional about those things. Like the emotions will still bring information to your conscious awareness, but they won't determine your actions nearly as much as when you are sort of unconscious of your capacity and don't prize your capacity, like the process in which you're engaging, above the particular results that you've achieved so far. So there's sort of some of the sort of detachment rhetoric that is a lot present in Buddhism is about, like you can, and especially in Stoicism, which I actually in some respects like more than Buddhism, because it actually doesn't depreciate gain. Like it's sort of, yes, detach yourself, but also actually exploit gain. Like it's nice to have that gain. So yeah, there's something about really identifying more with your ability to do things and to be effective in the world, sort of sovereignty idea, this agency idea, rather than, I've built up an empire and this empire is like makes me what I am.
Yeah, I think the fear of loss, when you identify very strongly with something, that's what pulls a lot of people out of their inner peace and their flow. And it's just the degree to which you try to hold on to something, or you don't feel confident in your ability to create more value in the future. Like, I think things always come and go. We're always trying to resist that change. It's like a current in your life. And we always maybe there's going to be a loss that we can't recover from, or that's going to overwhelm us, or that we put in so much blood, sweat, and tears, we can't lose this thing. We invested too much, of our time and energy into it, and it's become more than us. So I think getting that maybe break from society, we can talk about isolation, things to kind of give you that perspective. I think Stoicism is very much about that, and I'm a big fan of it too. At least, the basic concepts, how to apply that to your life. And if you actually, go without things for a certain period of time, you get a much better appreciation for who you are, and then who you are in relation to all those things you've acquired in your life, and all those things you called, important. But basically, yeah, when you have very strong reactions to like someone maybe taking away your shit, and you feel threatened by that, then I think your emotions kind of run wild over you, and maybe you just don't have that piece of like Oh yeah, I feel like I can create value again with just, starting from $1 and my time again, because I've invested so much in my brain and I have my health. So you have to remind yourself of like all the things people can't take away from you in that sense. The core parts of your being, it can never be taken away. And if you value those more highly, and that's kind of what martial arts is also about, is, you've trained that muscle memory, you've invested that time into your body, into your mind. No one can ever really take that piece from you. And so whatever else is taken from you in your life, you don't attach as strongly to those things because you've invested in yourself. And I think that all comes back to investing in yourself in one form or another.
Anything else?
Yeah, sorry, go on then.
No, go on, Ollie. Go on.
I was just saying, I agree. I think being able to, I think we do have, I think this whole thing of being able to be sovereign and stuff like this, and having a sense of independence that's not reactive on sort of externalities and things like this. I think there is some kind of emotional thing there, isn't there? It's just, I think we don't really have a language to classify emotions very well, because it's so subjective, because it can't really be quantified yet or whatever. But I think that the sense of independence, or the sense of capacity to do things and confidence, I don't know, it's very woolly, but they are different things to excitement and happiness and these things. And I think that maybe that's kind of being able to gravitate more towards those things, and maybe it's feeling things on a more subtle level because you still feel it, but it's not as strong. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, that's not very concrete, is it? But.
No, I think it's properly calibrating your ability to contextualize the information that your emotions provide you. Like not have it as this absolute that demands of you, like is an imperative for you to act in the specific way that the emotion wants you to act, and more to say, this is information that I was not aware of so far. I should integrate it into my decision-making process and my action, but I will check the best path of action not only against my emotions, but against my rational brain and my ability to understand the world, and maybe even ask other people, that kind of stuff. Of course, that's always a question of how much resource do you have at your disposal, how many people can you ask, and how much time and energy do you have. Like, all those things are always limitations. But that's why it matters so much to put your life in general in a stable or meta-stable enough fashion that you have those pockets available so that you can expand the time between a stimulus coming at you and your necessity to respond to it. And so that way you won't be forced always to make the immediate decision, which will by necessity not include all the information that is otherwise at your disposal. And that's actually one thing that leads people who are poor to make so many bad decisions that compound their misery, because they don't have the stability of mind, the emotional control, the freedom of time and resources to actually hone or like to actually consider what they could do, because they always have to solve the most important problem right now. They're always in urgent and important problem right now, rather than in important but not urgent. And so that's one of the big things that makes it so difficult to climb out of poverty once you're out there.
You could say the same thing for emotionally poor people then, as they don't take the time to think, and before they respond to something, they're just constantly in a reactive state because they're just jacked up. Their nervous system, is fried. So I think learning how to build those things back in, if you weren't taught that from a young age, that's probably, part of the path to sort of regaining that inner peace,
right,
and then just reacting all the time.
This is also the idea, I think, of the NPC meme, if you've seen it around. Like okay.
Go and explain it first.
Okay, so I think it was about NPC, which is a non-player character, and which is sort of a term from gaming, video games actually. And the idea of an NPC is that it's a computer-controlled character. So it's a character that doesn't think for itself, doesn't act on its own. So when you're, as a video game player, you're acting in a virtual environment, the game environment, you're encountering NPC players that are programmed by somebody else, the game developer, who build a whole world for them, a narrative and a script to act out. And you're the only one with agency in that world. And so it was used primarily by sort of internet trolls, or like people who consider themselves not NPCs, like people who have agency, to call, for example, the blue checkmark Twitter journalists and like everybody who's sort of generally in the mainstream narrative, mainstream media, mainstream thinking, older people as well, NPCs, because they are programmed by other people. They don't actually think. They run out a script, or like they have scripted thinking. There's actually a great article about this. I'm going to look it up and send it to you, about this exact phenomenon where people are engaging in simulated thinking. They have a template for how to classify, categorize, and then process particular stimuli, like Trump, oh, orange man bad, you know, or Russia, oh, like collusion, and like now we have this big nothing burger of the Russia collusion, which has been like made, like Trump has been exonerated. So like it shows this inability of a large part of the population to actually engage in critical thought, and instead just act out whatever they've been presented with the most from the environment, and haven't had the time nor inclination nor maybe ability to actually process independently from what they've been conditioned, from the way they've been conditioned to process it. So the NPC meme is beautiful.
Yeah, I think it ties back into this discussion. If you think about people that don't have that agency or sovereignty, they're more likely to go and need to get their truth from someone else and to hold on to whatever mainstream is feeding them. So they're not able to really discern between what is just, what you call fake news or whatever, or just an opinion versus, their reality, and how do they discern the difference. And I think that if you have maybe more peace in your life, you are not needing drama. That's one thing. And you can spot drama for what it is when it's being created all around you. I think the world is just full of drama these days. It's just like one big reality TV show. And so it's just pulling people from, one emotion to the next.
Well, it's significance, isn't it? Drama creates validity and significance in people's lives where otherwise they don't have it. So you can't blame them for it.
Yeah, I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying that we don't need to have that in our lives if we don't want it. If it's,
I agree.
If it's going to remove our inner peace, but yeah, it's everywhere around us, right? We can see it all the time. So I think tuning out of that is a big part of freeing up your time and your energy. But then, deciding to consciously maybe create a stress that's going to give you that resilience, and that perception of what is a real danger, what's imagined, something that's happening hundreds of thousands of miles away. How much does that really influence you? Probably not very much. But you let it affect your peace because you're caught up in the drama and whatever the story is. So so that's definitely another discussion, probably getting into media and how they kind of
drama,
people's consensus trance
drama. Sorry,
consensus trance, like this, like you're sort of hypnotized by all these stimuli coming at you constantly, and so you're this trance. Oh, this is real. This is real. This is real.
Yeah, exactly. Just reacting to everything around you instead of being maybe more detached. But I had a question for Lynn and Ollie as well, then, from their perspectives, like, where do people get stuck on this journey then of like using, if you like, controlled violence or martial arts to gain inner peace? Because you see a lot of probably examples where people completely lose it and they go into psychotic rages, some martial artists, or just get frustrated and drop out, or something like they call themselves a failure and quit, for something. So maybe you can give me some examples from your lives or things you've seen, like where do people get stuck on this, and how would you sort of guide them, or how would you consider that based on your own experiences?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think you could probably put this in, you could parallel it with, for example, smoking of cannabis or drinking of alcohol, how it can affect people very, very differently. Even though we say cannabis is far better for the human body than any form of alcohol, unless that's sterilize something, you'd probably say that some people there's already from something else that's happening, from their general makeup, cause a further imbalance to lead to a certain reaction when they go and they lose it, go nuts, for example. Some fighters, how they get into fighting and become successful fighters, their motivations for fighting, especially on a professional level, compared to, say, what Ollie was saying, someone who's training in the arts, not to be a snob about it, but training to fight. Probably the best example would be Mike Tyson. He's a lot calmer now. He's in a better place now. Smoking weed's actually helped him a lot now. But people would use him as a reference of how it can be so bad and how it can cause a lot of negative like you're saying, like people just lose it and go pretty nuts. But I'd say the first thing I'd say that would be, because everyone is so different, things affect people differently. It's not always for everyone. But secondly, his origin story is horrible. If memory serves, he I can't actually remember it properly, but it was a horrible origin story. I found I probably purposely blocked it out of my mind because I couldn't imagine a child having to go through what he went through. Oh yeah, he was like shooting up heroin at age 8, stuff like that. His mum was giving him drugs like that as a kid to help him sleep, stuff like that. And then he was fortunate that his anger was able to be controlled and vented by boxing from a very, very early age, 11, 12. He'd have been in prison probably a lot earlier. But when he did go after I was then go to prison, that eventually was just a build up of what had happened from early in life to him being at the point where he had a lot more free time, because the more professional you become in boxing, the fewer fights you have. So you don't have to train as much in a year. You still train, but you're not training as intensely as you would. Whereas if you're an amateur, who do 3-4 fights a year, you're like, say, top of the world like he was, it's 1 a year, maybe 2. So I gave him a lot more free time. Again, this is speculation in the agency to go and do what he wants to do. And it kind of, instead of letting out on someone in the ring or in the training, when he's training, it was just those around him, and so that kind of led to it. So I think that's possibly why it's just not for everyone. What about yourself, Ollie? What's your thoughts on that?
I do think that you can get sort of conditioning, and then it kind of becomes difficult to. I think people do get conditioned to sort of be destroyers and stuff like this, and then it kind of turns against them. And I think it is hard to have that sort of. I remember, like, I would train a lot of sort of Wing Chun with this my Wing Chun teacher, and he was all about just sort of like smashing people, and like fighting and sort of having this no sport. We would only spar to like knock each other out or whatever. We wouldn't do it very often at all, but it was just sort of, and then when I was sort of getting into MMA and sports stuff, it was difficult to pull the trigger, sometimes, because people would be sort of slipping and bobbing and weaving or whatever, and then doing a little hit. And then I was kind of like, I don't really know how to fight without trying to just go overboard. And this is just light sparring, or not that I would necessarily be able to finish them off. It's just about the scale of it. But I would also say that in terms of, for me, doing martial arts, it was always about doing the external stuff to develop the internal stuff, I suppose. And it became about being sort of separated to hardship or suffering. And it's sort of, there's a difference in Greek philosophy between stoicism and asceticism. And stoicism or aestheticism, and stoicism is about like, being sort of unaffected by what's happening. And asceticism is sort of a cousin of it, and it's all about sort of actually, they would walk around in rags, and they would like actually just sort of engage directly with suffering. And then sort of doing like hard training for a really long time, I would sometimes find myself stuck in that I was just kind of gravitating to a more difficult situation, just to like always trying to be in a sort of a growth phase, and it kind of it can be sort of post-productive. So then
seeking pain out.
Yeah, seeking pain out for pain's sake, just from conditioning, not and then sort of becoming sort of so comfortable with discomfort that it then led to an unacceptable level of discomfort sometimes, even if it's just in training or in whatever. And so when I sort of noticed that dynamic happening, I kind of had to take a step back and take some thought. And I think that some people do have that as well, that they just go so hard and they just burn out, and then they just kind of, that's how they experience it. And I think often people don't recover from it either. They just stop.
Yeah.
I think before we finish off, like one last thing I want to mention, this was a conversation I had yesterday with a friend of mine about how you introduce new life, which is you don't like add it on top of everything you're already doing and let it disrupt everything else that you're already doing, but you're gradually adding capacity by either cutting away other things you're doing, sort of via negativa way, by basically reducing the complexity of all the habits and things that are happening in your life, or just sort of introducing it in a very minor way and then slowly expanding it so that it doesn't disrupt your whole structure that allows you to have this inner peace, but it becomes a part of it that is in reciprocal relationship with other parts of your life. So like if I want to have a new habit, I don't just go overboard and like make it 5 days a week and like let it disrupt my other patterns that I'm already engaged in, because then it causes problems elsewhere. But I introduce it in a light way, and then I slowly ramp it up and see by the revealed preferences of what works and what doesn't of me, whether it actually fits with the other parts of my life. So for example, I haven't done a lot of physical activity in recent years. And so I've slowly reintroduced that now over the past half year to the point where I like do some stuff at home, and then sometimes I go to the gym, and then I do like weekly, like now it's to the point where I do weekly handstand class every Friday, like for 2 hours, and I do all kinds of exercises there. But it's like, I'm not going overboard. And I think this is a crucial sort of general point, but also specifically applicable to this subject that we've been talking about so far, of not overwhelming your capacity to deal with novelty, and instead taking sort of ecosystemic expansion of capacity approach, like adding something little that then can be enmeshed with other parts and enter into a web of relationships, rather than sort of standing alone, like this is now what my life is about.
Yeah, I think having that awareness of what's going to push you into panic versus stretch, and not trying to, like, it's very, people are very impatient, want to get straight away to that end state of like, yeah, I'm a master in this, or yes, I've achieved this, and you know, they break along the way because they don't have that awareness. So that's definitely something we can talk about in another show as well. But yeah, we're probably running up on time here, guys. So yeah, unless anyone's got anything else, we can probably wrap it up here. And thanks for your time, and we'll catch you on Thursday.
Well, a lot from it, guys. Good talk. Talk to you again.
Yeah, great. Fun. Cheers, and bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.